A lot of you guys are sick of watching 2011 videos, and I get it, but good news, I guess, is that there may be one fewer brand to worry about here in the future. What happens is Staccato recently cut off a big chunk of their independent dealers, and those dealers being upset shared a bunch of that on the internet, and now there was a bunch of speculation going around, so much so that the co-CEO had to record a video to respond. The letter that was sent to those canceled dealers has leaked its language, and it is pretty brutal. Now, the speculation is that the stock on hand would have to be sold as used. The warranty would not be honored unless the end user paid $200 a year to maintain it. And all of that is, unfortunately, misinformation. We'll kind of go through it. But there's also other signals that Staccato is struggling in other ways, potentially financially. We'll get into that after we kind of go through the information available. Now, for the record, I like Staccatos. I've got a few of the legacy 2011 product. I've got a few of the HD 2011 product. With the exception of the P4X, I have had trouble with that one and I don't really understand what it's for. There's some videos on that, and it just came back from warranty. There'll be another one coming out very shortly on the issues it still faces. But as far as the current situation, one of the dealers posted this screenshot that kind of set the internet ablaze with, hate for the fact that Staccato is turning its back on its smaller dealers, embracing their core dealers, as they say, to better support their core dealers and invest more in them. A more cynical reading of that is that Staccato is attempting to bring the markup that dealers tend to charge on the products in-house and go to direct to consumer and still have their big guys who buy a lot of guns to keep their cash flow going. That's a more cynical reading of the situation, but I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle. And this created a moment where other 2011 brands like Nighthawk and Alpha American decided to put up that their warranties are still good for the lifetime. Not just the first user, could be the 10th of the product. And if you look at what happened to the dealers who were jilted, they cannot send back any of the guns they have. Any open invoices have to be settled within 15 days. They can no longer use the Staccato authorized dealer stuff in their stores, and all of their back orders were going to be canceled. Now, clearly, I haven't been able to read the contract to become a Staccato authorized dealer, but it sounds like it's pretty one-sided in how it supports Staccato more than the dealers, which would be understandable why the upset dealers feel like they got screwed, because they kind of did. And that created a storm of sorts for Staccato, so much so that their co-CEO posted these videos to Instagram talking through the specific details. Now, one of the dealers alleges that the guns would have to be sold used and you have to pay $200 a year for warranty. Both of those are false, coming straight from the horse's mouth at Staccato. Any of the stock on hand would still be honored as new if sold as new, because the end user has to register the warranty for the warranty to come into effect. The $200 a year thing is actually referring to Staccato Care, which is a program for rich guys who don't want to clean guns or change springs on them to maintain them. They can just send them back to Staccato and they perform that sort of service for them. It's been a thing for a while. I have no idea how successful it is. I'm sure there are some rich guys with Staccatos who do that, but I would imagine not very many, because maintaining a 2011 isn't that hard. If you're somebody who wants to stay on top of spring changes and stuff for their gun, quick shout out to the app I'm developing. There's a link for iPhone users to check out the open beta in the comments below called Carbon Buildup. It will age all the parts independently to help you stay on top of change intervals. But it does open up the question of, while core dealers are still part of the Staccato model, was this phase one of potential multiple phases in dealership reduction to move towards direct-to-consumer sales, where they would just basically focus on selling the guns to police departments and doing, volume that way, and then just doing what other 2011 builders do, which is direct-to-consumer sales. Who knows? I guess time will tell in that regard. So obviously none of that's good. Doesn't really spell out that Staccato is necessarily in trouble. A lot of firearms makers are in trouble with soft sales in 2026 due to a weak economy and the fact that there's a bazillion 2011 builders at the moment. But what is a signal of trouble is that Staccato has recently had a sizable reduction in force. I've heard reports of up to 30% of their staff was let go. I've confirmed that with industry sources that know that is what happened. But why is Staccato having to both seek more revenue per unit sold, which is a reduction in their dealer program, and why are they cutting people? Let's look at kind of the history. I did a little bit of homework with the help of AI to understand the state of play. So on the screen are the sales figures dating back to 2016 through the most recent year of reporting, which is 2024. Staccato was not always Staccato. They started life as STI, Strayer Trip International. It was intended to be a smaller brand catering to competition shooters. The 2011 was developed specifically for competition. 2016 was roughly the end of the STI era, and they were doing about 7,800 guns. You could see in those years from about 2016 to 2019, there were more and more sort of tactical and 3-gun style models, which tend to favor the tactical style guns, eventually culminating with the release of the STI Staccato P for the next year, the entire brand to be reimagined as Staccato and not STI. They stopped making competition guns and they were now built for heroes, meaning that they were catering specifically to the law enforcement market. Now, in 2016, Westwind Investments came into the picture and sort of recapitalized, bought Staccato, and made significant investment into the tooling and development of the product. To their credit, they did fix the 9mm magazines for the 2011 platform, getting them to feed reliably. And I would say everybody has been a beneficiary of that. It was no secret if you were a competition shooter back in the day, if you were buying an STI, that was like the first step into getting a competition gun. You would then have to tune it and get it to work reliably because they just weren't reliable enough to be used in competition out of the box. Now, Staccatos absolutely are that reliable. You could take it straight from the box to the match and not have a problem in any major match because the guns just run. So the initial infusion of capital did a good deal. They were going from about 8,000 guns a year going all the way up to nearly 48,000 guns. 47,500 was the latest year on record. But also in 2023, according to pitchbook.com, there was a merger/acquisition bringing in Castle Crowe and Company, leading it to being listed as acquired and merged. That's a private equity site that kind of keeps track of that sort of stuff. What else happened in 2023? Well, Staccato, with an eye towards growth, changed their manufacturing facility from their hometown in Georgetown, Texas to Florence, Texas with an 87,000 square foot facility. That's a really big facility, presumably with a mix of their old equipment and some new equipment to fill the space. That's pointing towards a scaling strategy of doing more growth. But also on that land is the rest of the Staccato Ranch. They have their own kind of training facility, private gun range sort of thing. So that's going to be more capital, more overhead, likely trying to develop some sort of like Sig Sauer Academy type of model where law enforcement comes and trains with Staccato. And at the same time, in 2022, Front Sight went into bankruptcy and was bought by a brand known as Prairie Fire, and Prairie Fire in 2025 became known as Staccato Ranch Vegas. So Staccato has 2 of these ranches across the country. I don't know, and the information is not available to know whether they actually bought it or they just operate that land in Vegas. But either way, there's likely ongoing expense in maintaining a large chunk of land and shooting range. At the same time, the Staccato HD series of pistols was likely starting to be developed. It takes a couple years to bring a product to market. So roughly in that 2023 timeframe, the Staccato HD was likely starting to become cooked up. The Staccato HD basically took the 2011 legacy platform and made it specifically for the ninja segment, which is law enforcement and people who like to think of themselves like law enforcement. Using Glock magazines, it loses some of the gamey features of like the big magwells and stuff like that, and just kind of a reimagining of the platform with a firing pin block, all that good stuff. But you couple the kind of that history of like a bunch of growth, and now reportedly like the sales figures are flat and likely have been for the past couple years. We don't have 25 and 26 data available, but if it is anything like the greater gun market at the moment, sales are soft right now because of the weak economy. There's likely a lot of money going out at Staccato, and they need to bring more money in without their sales numbers increasing, which would make sense on why they're trying to realize more profit from the units sold and a reduction in cost in the form of a significant reduction in staff. And then when you consider that the competitive marketplace has just kind of exploded, like Staccato kind of turned their back on the civilian market when they went, both feet into the built for heroes model. But at the same time, Springfield Armory introduced the Prodigy, which sort of touched off this revolution of like lower cost 2011s being available. So there's a lot of people getting 2011s, but they're not necessarily getting Staccatos because, there are options that are about $1,000 less. Kimber entered the field as well with a gun that is competitively priced to the Staccato guns, but at the same time, is prettier, so is more likely to turn heads in an authorized dealer sort of environment. Because the economy is soft, I imagine contract sales are probably down. So, you know, why would you buy these $1,800? That's roughly what they sell the P4s for to the departments in the Blue Label program. Why would you buy these $1,800 pistols when you can get new Glocks? They probably sell those to the departments for like $400 or $500 a pop. And Glock came up with a new gun and putting more pressure on Staccato because the new Glock Gen 6s are excellent, and Glocks and Staccatos actually are substitutes, at least when you're building for heroes. So does this mean Staccato is doomed? Not necessarily. Does it mean they're facing the strong economic headwinds that a lot of us are facing in our real jobs? Yes, absolutely. Does it mean that the Staccatos you already have won't be brilliant in any sort of way? No, they're still going to be just as good. These Staccato guns are brilliant guns. They make very nice guns. I expect in the weeks to come that there probably will be some of the jilted Staccato staff, as well as the dealers sort of speaking out, likely under the cover of anonymity, but we'll probably learn more in the weeks to come. But it does ask the question of, did Staccato kind of find the ceiling for what the Built for Heroes sort of model is getting into? And they're probably going to have to come back to consumers if they want to continue to expand their sales numbers and keep up with their investments. But I'm sure there's a bunch of you guys out there who watched this video that probably have even more information to share. So let me know in the comments, and I'm sure we can all learn something.